guys, welcome back to Tahan Zoo, my sandbox build here in Planet Zoo. So today is going to be a fun one. Today, putting in 3 different habitats. This is for the Gharial, the Flamingos, and then for the Babirusa. So starting off with the Gharial habitat here at on the other side of the plaza from the proboscis monkeys. I actually wanted to include this in the proboscis monkey build, but I ended up leaving it out just for sake of time because I didn't want it to be like a 45 minute long video and you guys have to listen to me talk for that long. So I decided just to go ahead and move it over into into the second video, or third actually. I believe this is the third episode. I'm not really sure anymore at this point, but that's all right. Yeah, so today is going to be a fun one. There's going to be a lot going on here in this one. So the Gharials, I wanted to have kind of look like kind of they're in an open water type of lagoon here on the edge of the lake. So we just fenced off the edge with some chain link just to kind of contain them in their little lagoon. And then I wanted to have this kind of round viewing deck that you would walk out onto and be able to look down through the middle onto the Gharials. The Gharials, if you weren't aware, did have the deep swimming mechanics added here in 1.5, so they can use the fish feeder, they can dive, they can do all of that. They're awesome now. They're really cool to have in game now. Thought about trying to do some underwater viewing for them, decided against it. We're just going to have the viewing from the top, which will work out really well. So I wanted to do this round shade structure on top here and ended up using the non-gridded palm thatch roof pieces for it, which I actually didn't realize we had these until I went and looked for them. Yeah, so we have, these pieces turned out to be super, super useful for this. Took a little bit of effort to get the circular structure going here. Of course, I instead of building out one section of the wall and the roof at the same time, I had to go and do the wall supports, which are the round poles, and then the roof piece completely separate, which made a ton more work for myself than it actually needed to be. But that's all right, because I do get it done eventually. Building these circular structures isn't my forte. It's not something I've done a ton. I did do that big, huge carousel cover in Wildlife Trek, and that was a blast to do, but I did it completely off camera because it took me so many tries to get it right. This time, went ahead, you can watch me struggle a bit. I don't mind. It's actually good for... It's actually good to see YouTube content creators struggle with this stuff, because I know everybody struggles with this stuff, with the paths, with the trying to build, trying to get a circular piece to work, all of that. And a lot of content creators just cut that out. I really don't cut much out of my videos at all. Like, what's here is what you see. What I do is what you see here. So I'm not cutting it out. I'm not trying to edit and make myself look like I know what I'm doing when I really don't know what I'm doing. So right here, it worked. It just came together and started to work. And usually that's what happens when you're trying to build a large piece like this. You'll try and try and try, and then all of a sudden it just comes together and it's like, oh wow, look, that worked completely. Awesome. I'm never touching it again. So at this point, I decided instead of having just open water here, I wanted to have an island in the middle that the Gharial can come up on, and wanted to have some enrichment on there to kind of bring them up, and that way the guests can look down at them kind of doing their thing on land. But I didn't want to attempt to remove the entire giant lake just to put in an island, so I thought, well, heck, I'll just make it out of rocks. We have a ton of rocks, so just using the big rocks, putting them in, and making a little island. And I thought it worked out really nice, and the Gharial can actually use it. They can actually get up on here and use this, which is awesome. So I ended up putting their mud pit down here as their enrichment to kind of bring them up onto that area, and I thought it worked out pretty well. kind of realized partway through that this habitat is actually way, way, way too big. Um, just way too big. So kind of tried to pull it in a little bit in places. Now, at points here, you may notice that my frame rates start to absolutely tank, and it is very, very noticeable when it happens. I went from around 60 frames per second basically down to 6 or 7 frames per second. It pretty much became unplayable. So after a little bit of freaking out, worrying, is it my computer that I just built? Is it my graphics card starting to die because it is 5 years old and I've been working it to death for the past 5 years? Is it the game? Am I having a temperature issue, thermal throttling or something? Finally did figure it out after basically trolling around the Frontier Planet Zoo forums and the issue tracker and everything, figuring out what it was. It's the large lake. So yeah, finally figured out the problem with that. I do end up, basically the only way to fix this issue was to take the lake and remove it completely. And you'll see here, I do just get rid of the lake entirely once I figure out what's going on with it. Change the Gharials to, instead of being in a lagoon, they're just in a contained pond. So just close off that opening with like a land bridge, and that solved the frame rate issue entirely for me. Fortunately, I was actually getting quite worried there that, oh no, I'm not going to be able to finish Tahan Zoo because it's completely unplayable. Not anymore. We're back to 60 frames per second. My computer is no longer wanting to die every time I load it in, so we're good. That being said, I'm going to have to now rethink all the exterior portions of the zoo because this big lake was really a feature. I was considering putting like a riverboat ride through it. So I don't know what to do there. I may just make it smaller, may just make it separate bodies of water. We'll have to see. Or maybe just at the end, put the water back in and just let it be terrible. Let the frame rates be terrible and hope that Frontier eventually fixes this issue. Um, yeah, so that was fun trying to figure out what was going on there. Actually, probably would have had this video done quite a bit sooner if I had been able to figure that out earlier, but I'm glad I got it figured out. So at this point, just going around the edge of the Gharial exhibit, wanting it to be really lush and overgrown, wanted to kind of frame in our viewing points with the tall foliage so that you can't see them from the entire path, and I know the in-game guests are going to hate that. The view of the Gharials from this point is terrible. Yeah, well, that's fine. They can deal. I really don't play this game for the guests at all anyways. So wanted to frame it in with the foliage and all that and make sure that it's really around the edges of the habitats is really lush and grown up and planted up with a ton of different foliage to really frame off your views and to kind of hide the barrier fencing and any of the staff buildings too, because I really don't want any of that to be visible in this habitat in particular. So at this point, it's starting to come together really nicely. I'm liking what I'm seeing. I still haven't let guests in the zoo at all. It's been closed this entire time, and I'm probably going to leave it that way for a while. So framing in some of the path here with a little bit of a rock shelf, getting a little bit of these scalova bushes put in. I like to let them kind of grow over the path just a tad to kind of give it that overgrown jungly feel, and also to kind of hide the path edge so that way I don't have to make a curb for it or anything. Have the Gharials walking on top of their. So at this point, we're getting into the flamingo habitat. So I wanted to have the flamingos right here at the front of the zoo. The greater flamingos, they are a species found in tropical Asia, so I thought they'd fit really well. In here, wanted to have a nice water pool for them, and then some larger, some grassy areas. I ended up looking at some reference, not from Singapore Zoo for them, but for Turtleback Zoo. Just Googling Flamingo Zoo exhibit You end up getting a lot of Planet Zoo screenshots actually when you do that, but I ended up finding the Turtleback Zoo flamingo exhibit. Apparently it's fairly new. I'm not really sure where they're located in the country or in the world, but it's gorgeous. It's one of the best I've ever seen, so I decided to kind of steal their idea just a little bit with this. It has a nice kind of framed in rock wall and all that, with some kind of a really like loud, bright building with a rock wall and some waterfalls coming down on one side. So I thought it looked really interesting and I wanted to incorporate it into this one, especially since I couldn't find any really good references of the Singapore Zoo flamingo exhibit. I kind of toyed with using different railings on the side. Finally decided just to do a custom one and then use some of the rocks as like a barrier to kind of keep the flamingos in as we're getting them in, just kind of checking to see if they can escape. At some point here they do find a little escape route that I accidentally created, and then they like all get out at once, which is great, fun to deal with. It's all good. So went ahead and put their foraging pool kind of in the middle of the water, so it's just sunken down just a little bit, and then um, their waterfall enrichment over on the other side. Yeah, there they go. There they are getting out. I gave them an escape route with the rocks there, so it's very easy just to block that off with more rocks and put them all back in. I really don't like just the bare metal frame waterfall enrichment item. Just the just bare metal frame just doesn't look very good. It's really bad aesthetic. Covering it up with these flexicolor rocks though makes it look awesome, and make like a little wall kind of going off on the edge and then plant that all up, and it actually ends up looking really neat. So yeah, you can take things that look kind of crummy in game and turn them into something that looks, just the regular item looks kind of crummy. Jam a bunch of scenery pieces around on it and it'll look really, really good. So wanted to kind of get the foraging pool to kind of mesh with the surrounding area a little bit, kind of cover the edges in with some rocks and whatnot, and then get that wall all nicely planted up. You can see where I'm actually changing my settings right there. I'm trying to change the graphic settings because at this point I'm getting the really, really terrible lag spikes, and I just can't figure out what is going on there. So this is about the point where I finally figured out what was wrong with the frame rates and that it was actually the large lake. I think at this point I've gone ahead and removed it. I'm trying not to show that part of the zoo too much because it just looks really ugly at this bare open hole right now until I figure out what to do with that area. So I wanted to get in this kind of like, I don't know, beach cabana style building, maybe. That's probably not right. Um, Made it just really obnoxiously pink and white. Because why not? Let's have a really obnoxiously pink and white building here at the against the flamingo exhibit. Sure, why not? Oh, and this door that it put on, this is actually a padlock door, which is really cool. And you can, so it actually looks like a zoo door with like an actual lock on it, and it's FlexiColor. I believe it's Planet Zoo door number 2. It's fabulous, and I didn't know about it at all until I saw it in one of Paulsley's videos, and now it seems like everybody's using it, and so am I, because it's awesome. So I changed up the barrier from the hedge barrier to the wood barrier just because I wanted to, I don't know, I wanted to actually use the wood aesthetic a little bit in the actual barrier just a bit, and wanted to get rid of the barrier at the front entirely so that it's really open. And it kind of looks like, if a really determined guest wanted to go swimming with the flamingos, they probably could. They'd probably get dragged out by zoo security, but they probably could. I mean, it's a flamingo. What is it going to do? Kind of peck you a little bit? So, wanted to frame it in again with the Bengal bamboo, one of my favorite pieces. I probably overused that so much. And then with our little mangrove trees, make it just look really tropical and lush. And our greater flamingos in game do not like a lot of planting. I really don't care. This is Sandbox welfare's turned off. They they're going to have as much planting as I want to give them at this point. So I wanted to use the reeds around the edges of the fencing to kind of look like it's a little bit overgrown. So this would be like an exhibit that would be mowed and kind of manicured, except for around the edges where you can't really get a mower right up to it. You'd have to go in with like an edge trimmer, and they just didn't really kind of want to do that, or maybe maintenance hasn't come through to do that in a while. So it's kind of grown up around the fence edges a little bit. So that was kind of my aesthetic for that. But yeah, this is supposed to be like a really stylized, you are looking at a zoo exhibit when you look at this. This isn't a full immersion type exhibit like some of the other ones will be here in the zoo. This is a, here's our flamingos at the zoo, look at the flamingos. But I like the way it's coming together. Ended up using, instead of a default railing for the path, making some custom barriers, just a little bit of a standoff fence, just to, kind of keep the guests from totally wanting to go hop in and maybe try and steal a flamingo or something. Ended up using the East Asia fencing, which I haven't used very much before, and I actually really like it. It's flexi-color. Didn't realize it was flexi-color. You can change it from that really loud red to whatever color you like, which is great. Love the flexi-color pieces. They are my favorites. Definitely Frontier, we need more of this. More flexi-color pieces. So more scenery in the future. Please make it flexi-color. Like, unless there's a really, really good reason to have it not be flexi-color, it should be flexi-color. So I wanted to put in some shade shelters here for the flamingos. Went with kind of the same style that I've used for giraffe shade shelters in previous zoos. Just the palm thatch cone and a wooden post, and it ends up looking really nice. Again, kind of drawing some inspiration from the Turtleback Zoo because they have that same thing there in their flamingo exhibit. So the flamingos are done. Moving over into the Babirusa next, which ends up being a very fun little habitat build here. So for our new Southeast Asia piggies, I love them. Wanted to put a little bit of a kind of viewing area off the main path for them. Want it to be kind of a sunken habitat where there's not any type of a real physical barrier between the guests and the exhibit, just the shelf and the water there. And I wanted to have the edge of the exhibit, instead of being a fence in the background, being a actual terrain, kind of a shelf. And I'm drawing, again, inspiration from the Singversary Babirusa exhibit, which they have kind of this same thing. So they have, it's actually, I believe it's a concrete made to look like kind of a dirt wall barrier, but it ends up looking really nice. So it's kind of like a riverbank where you have the shelf, the terrain shelf, and then the interior of the exhibit is very, very bare. There's not a lot of planting or anything in it. And, well, that's because pigs tend to destroy their exhibits. If you try to plant it up, they're going to root it up. They're going to make it all, they're going to tear up all the planting. So you can make a really lush looking exhibit for them by leaving the base, or leaving the main part that they have access to fairly bare, and then heavily planting up the outside. So you can see right there I'm changing the shape of the exhibit a little bit, or the habitat a little bit, kind of shrinking it in. I have a tendency to make absolutely gigantic habitats, and I don't know why I do this. Like I said, I don't see scale really well, so not sure why that keeps happening, but decided to make it a little bit smaller because it was like 4 times too big. These pigs do not require a giant amount of habitat. So what I did right there, I actually just deleted the entire barrier and ran it again. Because it was easier than actually just trying to edit what was already there. So again, making it a little bit smaller, pulling that terrain barrier in just a little bit. I have some squared off areas here at the back where I'm actually going to put in the management building. So the hard shelter, kind of night stalls, night area, night room, whatever it's called. whatever the zoo tends to call it, area for the pigs where they can go in. They have their hard shelters. In a real zoo, they would have like some stalls and whatnot in there where they could be kept and separated if they needed to be. And then putting a keeper hut and staff room back there as well, because again, I like to have a keeper hut and a staff room for each and every habitat. Maybe share them between habitats if they're smaller, or with a couple of like small exhibit boxes, but for the most part, always want there to be a keeper hut and a staff room outside, right up against basically the habitat gate for each and every habitat, because then the keepers will actually do their job. If you make them walk a long ways, they're not going to do their job. So ended up putting the water back in at this point, putting in some rock work here on the edges, and somewhere in here I realized that this is actually way, way too deep. The Babirusa are not very big. This is yeah, this is just way too deep. It's not actually a great design for this because you can't really see them too well from the viewing area. Thought about changing it up, decided instead I'm just going to leave it because I would have to pretty much delete everything out of the interior of the habitat that I've already built and replace it if I tried to raise up the terrain in there, because unlike Prehistoric Kingdom, if you raise the terrain in Planet Zoo, you just bury your scenery items, and I just decided, you know what, fine. I'm just gonna leave it the way it is. It's fine. It, I'll just ignore it. They can be in a really oddly big, deep habitat. So maybe it's an old bear pit or something that's been renovated, and the bears are in a new habitat. We've repurposed it for the pigs, at least for a little bit. So that's kind of, we'll call it that. So again, wanted to kind of sink in and hide the edges of their forage box and their little mud wallow. Just doing that with the tropical rocks here, which fit in really nice with the rest of the habitat. They look like they belong there. And getting some logs in, just some, different elements that they could have in their habitat without actually like being able to destroy it completely, or if it's something that they do destroy, it's not a big deal. Not like a whole bunch of expensive exotic planting or anything. I was toying around with putting an extra like viewing area off of this side over here, and in Singapore Zoo, their Babirusa exhibit does have a elevated little palm thatch viewing deck. I ended up not bothering with that because the paths just were not cooperating. Just kind of said, screw it, it's fine. I'm not going to bother with it. I might come back and add that in later as just a non-accessible, just like a little stage prop thing. Decided against that right now because of time, and then also because I just wasn't feeling it. I don't really love building like non-guest accessible guest structures. I don't know why. I should just get over that and do it. But I wanted to put in a little bit of custom bamboo fencing here around the edge too, just as our standoff fencing for the guests. So we have our habitat fencing, which keeps the animals in, and then we have the shorter standoff fencing, which keeps the guests out. And I'm adding in there our Frank the Angry Archer, which is our scale item. If you're not familiar with that, it's the #1 downloaded blueprint on the workshop. I believe it was made by, I want to say Mr. Gomez made that one. And what it is based on an item from Planet Coaster, which is the Archer, which people use for scale because, again, it's kind of hard to see scale in this game unless you have something there to kind of look at and go, all right, well, this is a basically guest-sized object, and I've made what's supposed to be a viewing fence that's taller than its head. So yeah, the Archer didn't make it over into Planet Zoo, so somebody went ahead and created one for us. So yeah, go and find that on the workshop. It's a great little item to help kind of get your scale correct here in your zoos. And yeah, and then I wanted to kind of plant up the edge of the standoff fence just a little bit, so using some elephant ear plants, some fountain bamboo, sinking it down into the ground, more of those custard apple bushes, which are just fantastic, some bird's nest ferns. Just want to kind of keep the foliage to be native to Southeast Asia, to that region of the world, and to be really lush. And like I said, I want this to be really grown, and I want these grounds to look like they've been here for a very long time. So again, using those groupings of the palm thatch, really liking those. So I've only got about a couple of minutes of the speed build left here as I'm just planting up the final edges around the exterior of the Babirusa habitat. So this ends up looking really nice. It looks like a very realistic kind of a pig habitat, which is what I was going for. So again, you have that lots and lots of planting up around the edges where they can't reach, and then the interior of the habitat is quite bare. Added in just a couple of broken pieces, tree pieces, just to kind of add a little bit more visual interest to the habitat there, and then getting the roof put on the management building. As I've said before, I tend to forget the roofs. I have a lot of open top buildings in places, but yeah, it works. I remembered it. So yeah, getting this all finished up. So this was a really fun build, getting all these 3 habitats in at once. I do really hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave it a like. I do appreciate it. Helps me grow the channel. If you have any thoughts about this, please leave them in the comments down below. I love hearing what you guys think. Yeah, so let me know what you think about this. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. If you'd like to be notified when I post a new video, please hit the bell notification. So getting the Babirusa education in here really quick. I haven't done any custom billboards for them yet, but I wanted to do a little bit of a frame just for the standard education board, getting it in here. The plants were causing a great headache for this. Unfortunately, I ended up deleting them just to be able to select the stupid metal pipes, just to be able to color them black. But finally got that done. Got the education in, so the Babirusa are just about done. So in the next video, we are going to go ahead and get started on the Malayan tapir. So I do hope you'll join me for that one, and I do hope you will join me for that one. It's going to be a fun build, and it's going to be great. Thank you guys for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one.